Aiden, such a pleasure to have you on. Really appreciate your time. Like we are talking about before recording, I feel like you're a podcast pro. So like I feel like pressure's on today. You having done 200 plus podcasts, but obviously today the focus is going to be about you, fellow. I really want to double click on the future of work. I want to start really at the inception of fellow, right? Like why you started the company. You had started a previous company. You sold to SurveyMonkey. You spent a few years there as well. What gave you the itch to like go on the painful journey of starting another startup?
Yeah, good question. So the the journey kind of started. It actually had to do with our acquisition. So we sell the company, and Fluidware was maybe just under 100 people, and we sell the company, and we're now part of SurveyMonkey, and then scaled with SurveyMonkey, and then SurveyMonkey later IPO'd. So we got to see a lot of the growth and everything on the road there. And it was very interesting. Like before we sold the company, one of the things that we always said was it would be nice to be part of you know brand name Silicon Valley company, and we would learn a lot. Like a lot of the executives that worked at SurveyMonkey came from like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. A lot of them, were been there, done that types of folks, and we were just figuring stuff out on our own. We didn't necessarily have previous experience. We just made things up as we went. And so part of the reason and one of the appeals to selling the company in the first place was, this will be cool. We'll learn a bunch of things. And we did learn a lot. So amongst the things that we learned were that, in order to really scale a company, you need kind of some structured processes into place. So one of the things that I often say is that I'd never done a one-on-one meeting in my entire life, and when we got acquired by SurveyMonkey, I was like, oh, that's what managers do with their teammates. Or we didn't really do quarterly business reviews, or we didn't necessarily have a lot of the processes in place that scaling companies do. And so by being acquired into SurveyMonkey, we just got exposed to a lot of these different things. And what was kind of familiar to me was that, being a bootstrap startup in Ottawa, Canada, and having started that company, a lot of the ways that I would learn things is by using software products. So, for example, if you use Salesforce, you will learn some things about sales. You'll learn that things start as leads, and then they become opportunities, and then there's a funnel, and you optimize the different stages of the funnel. For someone who doesn't know anything about sales and is kind of trying to piece things together, that's a way that you can learn how things work. And that makes sense because a lot of software is about best practice workflows that are productized so that everybody can do those things. And so one of the things that we questioned was getting acquired into SurveyMonkey, seeing a lot of these like management practices and processes into place. We said, well, I wonder if we can build software where people could just use those software tools and get a lot of these best practices into place. So the original idea, what we wanted to do with Fellow, was just build what we called a manager's co-pilot. We wanted it to be the software tool that people could use and get these management best practices into place. And I'll kind of short circuit a bit, but as we started building the product, and how startups go, there's often pivots along the way. The thing that we realized in building that product was that the largest component, or the largest tool in the manager's toolkit, is actually meetings. And so if we really wanted to help managers and companies overall, the meeting problem was a major problem. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to tackle meetings head on, and the rest of what Fellow is about became about meetings. But
No,
yeah,
that's
it's a
fascinating.
bit of a long-winded intro story, but that's kind of how we started. It's and everything that I've started, to be honest, has always had these like pivot points in between. We always start trying to tackle a problem, but the more we investigate, the more we dive deeper, we realize that the big problem or the real opportunity is something maybe which wasn't the first thing that we were addressing, but something that we would have only been exposed to because we started digging and trying to build the business.
Yeah, it feels like you came to that insight. You were in the right direction, right? But you found something adjacent. I've thought a lot about this issue. Like in my previous company, of like like having a management OS of best practices, templates, playbooks. That like the best companies don't try and innovate on some of the things that are like mechanical. Of course, you want to innovate when it comes to our product, but you don't always want to innovate on some things that I've been known to work tried and tested, right? So like the army has a top down command structure for a reason, right? They're not trying to do holacracy. Like, so people have tried to experiment and failed. And so I really find that fascinating, where you're like, okay, we went to this agency, found an area to innovate in meetings. So yeah, maybe double click and explain, like, the from that point on, where you thought about meetings and what was the path to building and creating a product.
Yeah, and we've definitely been our journey there, but yeah. So as we started to build the product, what we realized is that we had built a bunch of different components, and I think part of this was because the pandemic happened, and the way that people use our software changed. So pre-pandemic, if you wanted to use Fellow, and if you weren't really in a remote company, what it meant is that you would take your laptop and you would take it with you into a meeting room, and that was something that had friction, right? Because not everybody wanted laptops in meeting rooms. People would tell us things like, "Oh, you want us to look at the laptop during the meeting and not at each other? That's super weird." But then, the pandemic kind of changed that, and now every meeting is on a device, and so as a result, laptops are always present during meetings, and so Fellow can always be present during your meeting. So that was really the great enabler. But to get down to it, basically, the problem that we realized was that when the pandemic happened, the number of meetings skyrocketed. Right, everything that would have been a casual tap on the shoulder, in a physical office, all of a sudden became a meeting, and meetings are on the rise. It's funny. We're actually about to publish a report, amongst our customer base, 30,000 plus companies. And so the thing that we have seen is, since the pandemic, the number of meetings has risen by more than 50%. And in some places it's worse than others, but basically, like, you have a situation where there's a 50% increase. And one of the things that we often say is that it used to be, when we worked in an office, there was actually a physical limit to the number of meetings that could happen at any one time, right? And so there were physical meeting rooms, there was only so many of them, and there was only so many that were maybe 10 plus people. And so there were all these physical limits. Now you have remote work. Basically, it's a free for all. Every person has the opportunity, without much discretion, to be able to usurp time from someone else's calendar. Everything became a meeting, and so it became crazy. Companies started to think that, wow, like, we're actually getting less. We have more people, we're getting less done. What's slowing us down? We're doing more collaborating and less working. And the meetings that we are having, it's not like we're walking into these things and feeling like, oh my God, we feel so refreshed. This was the most productive, session ever. It just became a little bit chaotic. And this is something that we kept hearing about, but also seeing in our software, that we had built a number of different components, but everything that we had built around meetings was really being used. And so from a founder perspective, we started to realize, okay, this is a really big problem. The pandemic made it a lot worse. We're seeing it in the data in our software. So we should just, this is what we should pivot into. So we should cut everything else out and then just focus on meetings. And really, what we wanted to do, as it related to meetings, is we wanted to build, this tool that would allow you to run effective meetings, make sure that everybody comes prepared in the meetings, runs the meetings well, follow ups on action items and decisions afterwards, but also a lot more. One of the things that, I often hear from my, other founder friends is they will say things like, well, I don't even know what meetings I should run. Like, what should I have? Like, what are the list of things that I should have? And how should I run my staff meeting? Do I do it correctly? I mean, am I supposed to talk about these things? Like, what's the best way to do it? And everybody's a little bit self-conscious about how they run their meetings, because everyone kind of thinks, like, it's kind of the opposite of driving. Most people think they're better than average driver. But when it comes to meetings, most people are actually like a little self-conscious about it. They're like, yeah, I don't know that I'm doing this right, or I'm doing it super well. And a lot of people haven't seen really effective meetings. So amongst the things that we try to do, our goal is to make it so that we democratize this idea of being a really great meeting host. And it's a lot of the things that you mentioned before too, right? Just the right playbooks, the right templates, the right structure, and all the different things that the product will nudge other participants to also do. So if fellow is doing a really good job, then all the participants in the meeting are also going to contribute to that meeting, and are going to be active participants versus just meeting attendees. So we kind of try to take all of these different things that would happen in a super effective meeting, and we kind of make it just super very easy to do, and package it in one place.
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. Can you give us maybe a sense of scale? Like since you launched, like I think 6, 7 years ago, like number of customers, users, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So the meeting report we're about to run is 30,000 plus customers that we have in that meeting, which is something that I did mention. Many tens of millions of meetings. So that happen on the platform. Customers in over 100 countries, and yeah, basically, so it's actually at decent scale.
That's not
Decent
too bad.
scale.
Yeah, you mentioned that stat about how meetings have grown, and you probably you saw the headline. And I'm sure you know it better than I did. But like I think Microsoft released some stat recently about usage of Teams in their Teams product. How in the past few years, I think there's been like 70% more Teams meetings because of the dynamic you mentioned, right? About like more remote, etc. So it's like talking about like a tailwind for your business, right? It's like right timing, pandemic. Now meetings intra-company are much more hybrid than ever, right? Even for companies that have in office, right? Like it's normal that half the staff is at home or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. All the different platforms: Zoom, MS Teams, Google Meet, Slack. Slack has Slack huddles and things like that. So a lot more of this virtual meeting stuff is happening. All of us are have this new playbook where we're running remote or hybrid companies, and a lot of the things need to be reinvented. And so one of the things that we like to say is that for a lot of companies, 15 to 20% of the aggregate time within those companies is spent in meetings. And so when you're a CEO of a company, the only thing that you have, really the main resource, is the collective hours that your people have in a week. And for a lot of companies, 15 to 20% of that is in this one activity called meetings. And there typically isn't another activity that is that big, right? Like, you think of what else competes, is such a large piece of the pie as meetings, and it's actually really hard to come up with anything else. I haven't been able to come up with anything else. And so when you do something that much of the time, it makes sense to try and do it well, right? So it's and I think like this is the thing that people really have to think about. And one of the things that I've just been, a lot of my also, I would say, peer founders who are building products in the future of workspace. The thing is, like, we save a lot of money on real estate because we're remote first, but I think we end up spending that money in different ways in order to run. Like, if you want to run a really good company, and a lot of that spend is in software. So you want software tools to do that. A lot of that is in, you still want to get people together. So every now and then, once or twice a year, bringing people together in these bursts. So I think what happens is that it's probably ends up being the same level of spend for companies. They just spend it in different ways.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's fascinating to hear you talking. There's so many different areas I think I want to double click and spend time on in terms of like how you think about culture, right? Like beyond just Felon what you're building, but like you're exposed to so many different types of companies that are using meetings differently. Right? Shopify famously said no more meetings, or like like a ban on meetings, like a complete reset. All the way to the extreme where I see like friends that are working maybe more in the corporate environment where the bane of their existence is like I'm stuck in friggin' meetings all day long, right?
Yeah.
Um, how do you think about when you talk to your customers, like how they should, like how often, they should structure meetings, how they use your platform to empower them, right, to have the right kinds of meetings. Like it's such a complicated question, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Shopify. So Shopify is a customer and has been a customer for I think 6 years now. So it and I kind of want to correct this idea of like no meeting. So they do something which is awesome, and I think more people should follow. Toby has this saying which is it's harder to delete things than add things. It's very easy to add things. Addition is hard. Subtraction is really tough. Addition is easy. Subtraction is hard. And so, uh, so the thing that they do is they have this purge, week where they basically delete all these recurring meetings. With the idea that some of them will come back. So after a period of 2 weeks, you can be more purposeful, really think about the things that you should add back, and it's but it's a great process, and it's something that we actually do recommend to our customers as well, to have a period of time where everybody can kind of, it's almost like cleaning for your calendar. Get rid of everything, and then the important things that need to come back will come back, but at least you're doing this collectively. It turns out that it's very hard to do if everybody doesn't do it collectively.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things that you actually want everybody to do at the same time. The other thing that's really changed, and there's actually a series of things that we kind of recommend and work with our customers on, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we want to help companies reduce their meeting footprint, make sure they spend less time in meetings, and any time that they do spend should be super high ROI. One of the things that has changed, and since November 2022, when ChatGPT came out and AI really started to become part of the fundamental way that we all think and operate, is AI is in the mix, and so one of the areas that AI has a really great use case for is meetings. And so one of the things, for example, that we like to say is that you shouldn't be a meeting attendee, you should be a meeting participant. And so what that means is that if you're not going to actively talk for a significant portion of the meeting, then that's not a meeting that you should attend. But the only way that you can do that and remove FOMO from the equation is you have to make it really easy for people to consume the information after the fact. And so, Fellow, obviously, like this is a focus area of ours. We have an AI meeting bot that'll attend the meeting, take the notes and action items. And one of the things that we like to say is like we have human level AI summaries, like to the point that you can actually read the summary, and it's not just like here are some topics that were talked about. It is a summary that if you read, you will actually not need to go to the meeting. And so when we're able to provide things like that, then it actually, from everybody's perspective, they're like, wow, if I am not going to speak during this meeting, I literally could consume in less than 5 minutes what would have taken 30 minutes of my time. It completely changes the game. So it's one thing for us to be able to say these things. But when the tools are in place and people start to viscerally understand, wow, I can save so much time by consuming summaries or notes or things like that after the fact, that I don't need to participate. That's how you actually can reduce time spent in meetings across the board.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's fascinating, man. It's fascinating. How do you maybe to talk about strategy for a little bit for Fellow? How do you think about competitive advantage today, where there's this plethora of AI tools? Like, I'm sure you've seen a bunch of them, and like consider them, like different levels, competitors or not. But it seems like there's this rush to like AI transcription, AI summaries of meetings, much more common. So, like, yeah, how do you think about competition?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things which is always interesting is like in tech, when you're in this tech world and you kind of look around, we're all still in this bubble a little bit. Like everybody around us, we think everybody uses these tools, but it's very interesting. Like it turns out that most of the world still doesn't. Like they've heard of these things, but really experiencing it is something different. And so that's one point. Like the market is really big, and you can get to a lot of people. But the second thing is like the not all products are created equal. So when it comes down to it, I mean, even if we're to talk about some of the basic things that maybe a lot of tools claim that they have, is when you actually take a look at the, a recap that's created from a meeting, or you look at the action items that were noted, this becomes really interesting. So if you compare, say, Fellow, and you compare, a bunch of other tools, and you actually look down to it, like basically look into the details of what are the different outputs that each one of these tools produces. Um, Again, I'm biased, so everybody should test this for themselves to verify. But we have what we call like human level. So basically, like it is so good that you would never want a human to do it because it could not compete. And this is really important because if we're to tell our customers you actually don't need to go to the meeting, it has to be like near perfect execution. So when an action item, so nothing slips through the cracks. So one is that, like, I think we've spent a lot of time perfecting it and making sure that it's human level AI recaps that come from the meetings. But the second thing is Fellow is a lot more than that, right? That's kind of like a feature in Fellow, and Fellow is much more a meeting management platform. Our product was launched in 2019, so we've actually built like a suite of things, and it's not just AI note taking that's a component of it. But a lot of it is just making sure that people come prepared to meetings. They're able to run the meetings, with a collaborative agenda, and obviously track all the action items and things like that inside the product. So Fellow has a lot of those tasks and things built in. It's integrated with everything else you use. So, for example, you'll send things to Asana, Jira, Trello, Monday, any of these sorts of tools, or send notes to Confluence or Notion, and have bidirectional sync. So and a lot of workflows. So for example, we have an automation in Fellow where if you don't have an agenda, it can automatically cancel your meeting, right? So there's a lot of like detail in um, doing all the work to make meetings productive. One of the things we like to say is that if your meeting is if you transcribe and summarize a shitty meeting, it was still a waste of time for everyone involved. So what we're trying to do is much more than that. We're trying to make sure that meetings are effective. We reduce the meeting footprint across the board, and AI is a very core piece of that, but it's part of the puzzle.
Yeah. No, I like the pitch, man. I like the pitch, like wearing my investor hat. I find that last point you mentioned really riveting of it. Like, it's not just, like transcription of a dumb meeting. It's, we're trying to help create significant value for our customers by making meetings themselves much more efficient. How much can you share about, like you mentioned things that you're working on your product today, integrations. How much can you share, maybe product roadmap, AI features, and or just regular good old software features that you guys are thinking about and in the works?
Yeah. So I think like what we're the way we like to think about meetings, and this is really interesting, right? So as an investor, you get this, that data is everything. And for a lot of companies, the largest source of data that exists is the conversations had in meetings, right? So for a lot of companies, that's the biggest data source, and it's untapped, right? Like most conversations are not mined in any way, like they're not used. And when you think about the collective knowledge that exists within an organization, a lot of that is, to this point in time, not really captured or harnessed. And I think like that's the really big opportunity, right? Which is like if we can contribute to helping harness those conversations for companies and making them useful for the companies, that's huge, right? So everything from like taking wisdom within an organization and making sure that it's accessible everywhere, building things that will allow content from meetings to go to all the relevant sources of truth. So for example, if you're a recruiter, maybe conversations from interviews can go into your ATS. If you are a salesperson, it automatically updates your fields in your CRM. If you're an engineer, like it'll automatically go to Jira and Confluence. So what we want to do is we want to make it so that like all of the information within an organization's conversations are harnessed, but also we want to think about the enterprise, because like privacy, security is super important. Not everything should be recorded, not everything should be kept. And so and because we have so many, large companies as customers, a lot of publicly traded companies, in healthcare, in military, like all throughout, what we want to do is we want to provide the right redaction tools, the right workflows that'll, you know, delete things, on a certain cadence. So really give companies like the flexibility to be able to think about those workflows. So if we're having a conversation, I should be able to say like on the record, off the record, and then also have workflows where I can just say like, this part of the conversation, let's like not keep that part of the record, and be able to do that after the fact. So those are the sorts of things that we're working on.
Yeah, no, it's super fascinating, Aiden. I find one thing, just a few ideas that are popping to mind is, this notion of institutional knowledge, right? Like, think of like, I'm sure it's happened to you, like you've lost a key employee or someone that had a lot of, or it's like, shit, like it's gonna be tough. We lost, a key contributor, and that person had a lot of institutional knowledge that now just evaporates, is gone with that person. Now you have a way of cataloging a lot of that information, right? That lives inside of meetings. And the second thought that crossed my mind is, everyone talks about these, agentic systems in AI, and right now the biggest, the one killer feature everyone's talking about is like having this persistent memory eventually, right? When you're talking to an LLM, well, you have that today by default with your product because you're tracking all the meetings that are happening across the organization. So you'll be able to catalog the data set and institutional knowledge and surface that at the right time for a leader to take advantage of. So yeah, I find that fascinating.
Yeah, what else is huge? One thing that we're playing with internally, and is soon to be made public. Depending on when this episode goes live. But I've been starting my Mondays by getting a report that just tells me, hey, what did I do last week, and what are the things I need to follow up on. And here's my favorite part, which is, as a manager, I want Fellow to tell me, what things should I follow up on with other people? And those are not necessarily action items, right? Those are things like, so and so said that they were working on this really important thing. It sounds like it's really important. Maybe you should, follow up on that to make sure that, that's progressing the way that you thought. Or this other person mentioned this project, but there was like there wasn't that much detail in it. And it sounded like more things need to be fleshed out. So maybe you want to spend some of your time, working with them on that. And so Fellow can tell you those sorts of things because again, it's participating in your one-on-one meetings and in your team meetings. And it's just like that. It's not just a second brain, but it's just like almost a second person that can do critical thinking on your behalf. And again, with our new, like the new thing, again, depending on when this goes live, you'll be able to do that kind of chatting with your meetings and with everything that you've done, and it just becomes, again, it's just a second layer of intelligence that will help you in your workflows.
Yeah. It's like, okay, well, like, yeah, like you've got me sold, man. I find it's really fascinating in terms of what you guys are building. Maybe personal question, if okay with you, and it's like, second time entrepreneur. You're obviously involved. Also, you have community efforts with fresh founders. Um, what most common questions do you feel? Like, I mean, I imagine a lot of founders reach out to you and like see you as someone that's like learned a lot, has a bit of scars to prove it. Yeah, some principles that you tend to share with founders that when they reach out for advice.
Yeah. So yes, so some of the common ones are, I mean, a lot of people ask about fundraising. And so, the reality about fundraising is that when you're a first time founder, and assuming that you don't have some storied background, you're an executive at Facebook, or, something like that, it's hard, right? Because you don't necessarily have the credibility, and you have to convince, investors to give you money. And so really, like, the best thing that you can do is just have traction and have numbers. And people often say things like, oh, so you're saying that without money I have to create all these numbers and make them look great. Well, if I make those numbers look great, why do I need investor money? But the reality is that that's what's involved. But but of course, like the second time around, it becomes easier because you've had a success, you've had a business, and then people are willing to give you a lot more leeway, or trust your credibility a lot more. So there is that kind of interim step. And so as a founder of a first time company, you just have to show more things with numbers, which means it's a lot harder, but you just have to get that traction. You have to get those first customers or first pilots, or something like that. One of the things that I often share with people is, they'll ask me, well, how do I get my first customers? And a strategy that I've used is, we never build any, we never start building anything until we have some people that would tell us that they would pay if we did build it. So, I've my co-founders and I have started 3 companies so far. And for all 3 of them, what we started with was just, mock-ups, and we'd show the mock-ups to potential customers. And you really have to wait for the way that they react to those mock-ups, right? So there's like a, would you use this? And then, they might say something like, yeah, I would use that. But then there's a difference when they like really lean in and get excited about what you're building and ask you questions. And so you really have to, based on the emotions of what's being expressed, really understand if this is something that they would drop everything and pay for, or is this kind of like a nice to have? So that's something that we've done every single time. And the other thing is just this idea of founding customers. So once you have those mock-ups and you have validation that these mock-ups, are going to result in customers that will pay, then it's just, how do I get my first 10 paying customers? And one of the things that I've often used is to say, hey, we have a new product, and this is what it is, and we're recruiting our first 10 founding customers. There's only going to be 10, and we're not going to get more. And the reason is that we want to work with these customers and incorporate their feedback. If you were going to be a founding customer, the advantage for you is that you're going to get a very special deal, call it like 80% off for 2 years, something where it's like, it's a no-brainer, like you should just sign up for this thing. But in exchange, you'll give us feedback. We'll have meetings once every month, and you'll give us the feedback. But that makes a huge difference. And they have the title of like founding customer, and you can put them all in a Slack group, and it's kind of like a community, and they're really vested in your interests as well. So that's another thing that I've done a few times, and another thing that I recommend to most people who reach out.
Yeah. I like the first and the third. Well, I like all 3, but I like the last one in particular. Is like kind of a play on 1,000 true fans, like finding your first key fans, and also the best revenue is the best funding is customer funding, right? So it's like, hey, if you're not able to get money, where it's like, build a product that people are willing to pay for, and at the same time, like, why dilute yourself so early in the process? If you have customers willing to pay for it, then the price for your company just went up significantly, right? Because it's no longer theoretical. And on a slide deck, it's actual paying customers, right? So really key pieces of advice. What led you down like the entrepreneurial path? Like, is it something really like from childhood? You're like always had this like I want to start a company, forge my own path, with the good and the bad that comes with it, or is it something that just happened organically?
No, I mean, for me, it's funny. Some people who've built like very large, very meaningful, world-changing companies have, accidentally gotten into it. I think for myself and my brother, who's been a co-founder for all 3 companies, it was a since childhood thing. We just started, very early on, from basic things like building websites to other people, and then hosting them, and then just constantly looking at what the next thing is. So yeah, we've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of the things like, it's a calling, and, you want to be an entrepreneur, and it could be a lifelong kind of like, passion. And what I like about you were describing, it's like, there's always these different, squiggly, like paths that people take and work on one aspect, but then discover a new calling and work on it. Right. So, and it creates enormous value for the world.
Yeah, there's no one right path. There's always, anything where you say like, this is the path or this is not the path. There's always examples of people that are counter to that narrative. And for us, it was actually very interesting. I think we started. Um, we grew up in New York City, and so when you grow up in New York, basically you're gonna have people in your class or friends or whose parents work on Wall Street, and so you're just exposed to financial markets. And we were growing up during the first dot-com bubble, and so we saw a lot of that, and we started day trading and in the stock markets like very early on. And in the summers, we were too young for anyone to give us a job, so we started doing that kind of stuff. And we were always inspired by like the founders of those tech companies that whose stocks we were trading. And so that's kind of where we caught the bug, and we were like, wow, like these guys are creating these companies, and we're these kids buying their stocks. And so we wanted to learn more about that, or how do people build companies. And I think that's where the I guess the obsession started.
Yeah, the bug came from, right, wanting to get in the arena, right, to quote the trope. Maybe a geeky question, man, like what, like you have a podcast like 200 plus episodes, and it's not common for a funded, like VC funded tech startup to have its own podcast. What led you to doing it? I'm very very curious, like like obviously I'm biased. I think every company should have a podcast or some form of media, but yeah, want to like, but it's like I said, it's still not common. I think a lot of alpha to be gained by doing it. But yeah, curious to hear you.
Yeah, I think it starts from like the what we like our worldview on how we want to market, how we want to do marketing. And so one of the things that we said was that we want to be an education first company, meaning that like our goal is to make the world, like solve the world's meeting problem. And the way that we're going to do that obviously is our software is going to help solve that problem for people, but another way to do it is also education, right? So you don't, you can have a good meeting without software. It's true. Like it can happen. It's harder to do, and not everyone does it, and so on and so forth. But it is possible if you're educated and you do all the right things. And so part of it was we just wanted to create a lot of educational content. And so when and our view was you can be a customer in two ways. You can either consume our content or you can use our product. Hopefully, you do both. But so we just started creating a lot of content. And so when you start creating a lot of content, part of it is you write a lot of blogs, you create a bunch of ebooks. But another part of it is you just need to also like see what's going on in the field. Like how are people running meetings? How are they doing management? And so for us, it was like this is a part of this is our market research. We're talking to people and understanding how they're operating. We're taking the best practices, we're writing about them, and the things that we think are really, really good, we bake those into our product too. So we really saw it as part of like the whole integrated strategy versus like, hey, this is a channel we're going to bolt on. We just saw it as like it makes sense. We can write a bunch of things, but where do we get our sources of knowledge? Sometimes we can read and we can research, but nothing beats talking to people who are successful, running successful high performing teams. Let's talk to them and see how they do things and take the learnings and make it available to all of our customers.
Not just creating good content in the world for people like like myself to consume, but also good lead gen, right? So it's like customers that eventually want to like buy your product, and refining your product based on the knowledge you get. I find so very good business reasons
Yeah.
to do it.
Podcasts are like the way that I think about it is that you have to, if it's an integrated part of your strategy and it's like an important piece of the puzzle, then it can work. But if it's like hey, this is a bolt-on thing and I'm going to do this and this is going to, it doesn't work that way. The other thing is you have to be passionate about it, right? So you want to, you basically want to look forward to the conversations that you're having with people that you're excited to have them with. And if you do that, there's also like a personal notion. I mean, the people that I've talked to, so many inspiring people, and I learned something in every episode. Sometimes I'll do the conversation and then I'll listen to the episode maybe another 2 to 3 times over the coming months because there's so many good things in there.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. I'll link your podcast, the Super Managers, in the in the show notes. Last question, Aiden. Great conversation. Like, if people want to reach out, connect with you, learn more about Fellow, what's the best way?
Yeah, so Fellow you can just find at www.fellow.ai, and you can find me. I'm on Twitter at Aiden, but I spend most of my time on LinkedIn, so not as active on Twitter.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks so much for having me.